Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. Really glad to have you back. I myself got a little bit of vacation, so took a few days off, and I'm glad to be back here. And just to let you know, last month we had the highest number of listeners ever. So that's a big deal. It means that you guys are enjoying the content, you're sharing the content, and I encourage you to keep doing that. I mean, there's a lot that's thought through on this show, and I'm trying to give you information that you can utilize right away to change your philosophy, change your wealth, change your lifestyle. So many things that can help you. And so you'll find as you listen to this podcast, so much of this is dental, but so much of it is not. So much of it just applies to your life and applies to business and applies to wealth. And, as you've been listening, some of you longtime listeners of my podcast, maybe this is your first time listening, maybe you've been listening to a long time, but, those of you that listen consistently know, I'm trying to reach out and touch people. And yes, this is a dental wealth podcast, but understand this is for a lot of people. A lot of people need this information. So don't be afraid to share it. Even if you're friends in a different profession or family members in a different profession, the information here is, a lot of it, I'll talk about dental. I'll talk about dental things, but you'll find a lot of it is outside of dental. And that's just because it's overall business knowledge. It's knowledge we can all utilize in our lives. To grow our wealth and our personal development and our impact. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about debt. Now, this is a topic that when we get into, to be completely honest, we could talk for the next 8 podcasts on debt. And there's times, because one of the things I really spend a lot of focus on is capital management, and that can get really complex. And in fact, sometimes when I'm on stage and I'm coaching on some sophisticated topics, I can see people's eyes roll. I've lost them. I can look at them and say, I've lost you, haven't I? And they'll just give me that nod, yes, you've lost us. So believe it or not, this can be a very complex. It's not always very simple, but I'm going to try to kind of give you some things and some thoughts around debt and how to utilize debt as far as creating wealth. And I'm going to give you deep enough to give you some, maybe your brain a little strain, but I'm not going to get so deep that I hopefully lose any of you. But I'm also going to warn you, this is not going to be a podcast that's about Dave Ramsey style debt reduction. And so if you think it's that, it's not. I've got tremendous respect for Dave Ramsey and those types of folks. I'm all for paying down debt. And in fact, my average client pays off their personal mortgage in 3 years. Multi-million-dollar building in 7. I mean, I'm really big on debt reduction, but I come from a different angle on it. And I'd like to express that philosophy with you today. I do believe in reducing debt. And in fact, I think that a lot of people utilize debt to buy depreciating assets. And believe it or not, depreciating assets are often bought in the dental practice and that have no ROI. But somebody convinced us to buy them because they told us it was a business expense. And so we bought a depreciating asset, and because we thought it was for a business expense, it made sense. So believe it or not, debt can make you very, very wealthy. Debt can make you very wealthy. So remember, this is the Dental Wealth Podcast. This is not the Dave Ramsey pay down your debt, live off bologna sandwiches podcast. I'm not saying that some of you should maybe live off bologna sandwiches for a while and pay off your debt. Maybe you should. But the intention of this is to say, how do you utilize capital? How do you utilize somebody else's capital, right? They always say utilize somebody else's money. How do you utilize someone else's money to become wealthy? And in fact, an MBA concept is this concept that debt is less expensive. Okay, debt is really, it just carries more risk. So using your cash is more expensive because of the opportunity cost. What you could do with that cash, it's more expensive. I mean, debt right now, you can go refinance your house at 2.98% as I'm doing this podcast. I mean, that is so inexpensive, right? So debt is cheap. One of the conversations I keep getting is people call me up and say, hey, this EIDL loan that's out there, this, should I take it? Should I take it? And for some people I've said, yeah, well, what are we going to do with this money? So if we're going to borrow this really inexpensive debt from the government, we have a 30-year amortization. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of you don't. Then we have to get return on it right away. So I'll come back to that in a moment, but it depends on what you're going to do with the money. So let's talk about when you buy debt. When do we utilize debt? I think that's most important then. So, okay, Eric, when do I not use debt? When should I use debt? Debt on depreciating assets. Debt on depreciating assets is rarely ever a good decision. I say rarely because there are sometimes, because it might free up some capital for some other things. Like I said, I'm going to try not to get too deep on this podcast, but every now and then it can make sense. But for the rule of thumb, we do not utilize debt to buy depreciating assets, things that don't go up in value, that have no ROI. Now, you could say that there's some qualitative ROI. If you buy a car and it gives you a smile every day, I guess you could say, that gives me some ROI, but it's certainly not a financial ROI, right? I mean, it's not we'd all have to agree, financially speaking, that's not a great decision. And this is a financial podcast. We want to use debt to buy appreciating assets. So let me tell you how debt can make you wealthy, for instance. What I find is that people spend what they make. You've heard me say that on this podcast before. People spend what they make. And so here's a good example where debt can help. So I had this lady who came to see me a few years back, and right away I paid off her home. Like that morning, I think we made a phone call to the bank, and I said, hey, we're going to move this asset and that asset. And by the way, this has happened plenty of times to me. It's not just one occurrence, but it happens every time it seems like I do this. Because what happens is I say, okay, let's pay off your debt. So I told you, I pay off homes really quickly. So we moved some assets around. We paid off her house. And the house payment was approximately $3,200. So I said to her, a year later, I see her 12 months. We're all excited. She's got this financial plan. She's got no debt payment. She should be flying through the moon, right? We're going to take the $3,200. We're going to put it somewhere else. After 12 months, I said to her, when she comes and sees me again, and I said, so what have you been doing with the $3,200 a month? And she said, well, what do you guys think? Wasting it. It's gone. She goes, I have no idea where it is. It's just disappeared. See, that $3,200 a month mortgage payment, believe it or not, was going to buy an asset. So she was buying an asset. And yes, if you're going to have a personal debt, I mean, a home is probably the place you want to have personal debt. We'd all probably agree that would make sense. And she was buying an asset, an appreciating asset, and it was forcing her, in a sense, to save $3,200 a month. In a sense, right? It was going into this debt, and a certain portion was going to principal. Obviously, the more aggressively we can get on paying it down, we'd reduce interest cost. But it's interesting, in the absence of that debt, that money just disappeared. Well, that happens all the time. It happens to people all the time. If I put $10,000 in your bank account, it's funny how interesting, like it'll disappear very quickly. If I give you a $2,000 pay raise, like every single one of you tomorrow, $2,000, you'd be surprised. They say it takes 27 days in the United States. I don't know where this statistic came from, but 27 days in the United States to eat up a raise, right? Because as soon as that money goes up, then someone buys a bigger home, or they buy another car, or they buy. So sometimes debt. Let's say I took that $3,200 from this lady. And I took that $3,200 and now I bought an investment piece of property. And I took out debt to do it, okay? Because she didn't have, let's say the investment piece of property was $250,000. And she didn't have $250,000. Let's assume in this situation that she didn't have $250,000. And so she borrowed the money, and the borrowed money was very inexpensive. Let's say it was 3%. And that money, instead of being wasted, which is what happened every month, would have been buying over $36,000 a year, principal into an investment. So in a sense, it forced her to save. If she had taken that money and bought an asset and utilized debt, she would have had that payment every month, right? In a sense, that debt would have made her pay a payment, because if she doesn't, she defaults on the loan. So in a sense, it forced the money out of her hand. Now, it is a sense for savings, but I'm saying is, now she might have rental income that she reinvests that income. There's a lot of things she can do, but if you think about it, and this is a concept people have a hard time getting their head around, is that I would rather you take debt and buy an appreciating asset and then have that asset paid down than to blow the money. Say you brag and say, well, I don't have any debt. Eric, I don't have any debt. But if we're wasting $5,000, $3,000, whatever it is a month, then I'm not sure that's something to be boastful about. And I'm giving you just a different way to look at it. Now, on this podcast, I'm like looking into the camera and saying, I am not saying to go take out a bunch of debt. That's not what I'm saying. This is about education. Because the truth is that I might have the cash to buy something cash, but I might utilize debt because I might want to use my cash for something else. For instance, I might have $60,000 put aside in my business checking account to go buy another operatory. But instead, I borrow the money from the supply company. Then what I do is I take my $60,000 and I put it into a marketing campaign, and the marketing campaign will fill the patience in that chair that will allow me to take that money that's coming off the new operatory and pay it down very quickly. And if I paid that new operatory off in about 6 months, which I could do the math for you, but it's pretty easy to do, then it would cost me probably $1,300, $1,400 in interest expense, but I would have this new chair paid off. I borrowed somebody else's money. It forced me to make that payment, and I used my money for something else. Now I have to be careful. I'll get too deep on this. I'll get too deep because I love capital investments. I love capital management. And so we can get really complex with this. But here's what I want you to get from what I'm trying to tell you. If you're just going to blow the money, then utilize a forced savings that's going to make you buy an asset. If you're just going to waste the money, if you don't have the accountability, and by the way, you know who you are. Now, some people utilize debt to be just strategic, and they do have the discipline to make the right decision. But some of you know right now that there's $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month that's disappearing in your business, and you don't even know where it's going. And some of that money could be utilized to buy an asset that is appreciating and has a return. Now, before you start going out and taking a bunch of debt to buy supplies and buy equipment, before you start doing that, because I think what you'll hear is, I'm going to go use debt and go buy a bunch of stuff. Now, that's not what I'm saying. I want to be very clear on this. Don't use debt to buy shiny things from your supply company that you're told that are assets and they'll be utilized to reduce your debt. Don't go buy things. So you go buy that operatory and that ROI that comes off that operatory, you don't do anything with it. It just gets absorbed into the organization. And guys, you know who I'm talking about. You bought an operatory, you didn't feel like you made any more money. That's because you didn't isolate the ROI. And then someone told you, hey, go buy the new scanner or new piece of equipment because it'll reduce your taxes. By the way, we never let the tax tail wag the dog. We never make business decisions based on taxation. If your CPA is telling you to make business decisions, cash flow decisions, buying things to reduce your tax liability, I'm telling you, you've got the wrong CPA. I'm telling you right now, you have the wrong CPA. Now, you might have put cash aside to make a purchase in the calendar year that was strategic. That's different. But at the end of the year, buying a bunch of stuff to reduce your tax liability, if someone's telling you to do that, I'm going to tell you right now, you've got the wrong person giving you advice. And that's a fact. You need to go search for somebody else. Because we don't use debt to go buy things that don't have ROI. What do I mean by that? Okay. I go buy a scanner because I say, well, a scanner's great, Eric. I just want this new scanner. Or how about a CYROCKET? Like, I'm going to go buy a CYROCKET. It's going to be a great piece of equipment. It's $140,000, $50,000, and it's going to be amazing. And it doesn't actually make your profitability go up. Go study it. It doesn't make your profitability go up. Because what ends up happening, if you do enough of them, then what ends up happening is then you have to hire someone to actually man the thing, so your personnel costs go up. Most people use them as clothes hangers. Scanners the same way. Look, there's some advantage to them, but if you're just doing them just to have this fancy tool in your office, then most of you utilize debt on a depreciating asset. It is depreciating asset. Okay, you get to depreciate it. It's a depreciating asset. That didn't even give you ROI. How many times do you buy something for your dental practice that has no ROI or limited ROI, is just shiny, and you utilized it to reduce your tax liability? That is not how you become wealthy. And that's a huge mistake. Now, what I might do is I might utilize debt strategically, and I advance that debt based on the ROI. So hear what I'm saying. When you buy a piece of equipment, let's just say it's an operatory, you fill out an operatory. When you do that, you need to have a strategic plan, because that's depreciating assets, but it's going to give you some ROI. You've got to have a strategic plan how to take that ROI and utilize it to reduce that debt. And then what are you going to do as soon as that debt's gone? Where will that money be reestablished? Where will it be put after that? And if you do not have that plan in place, don't buy it. Don't buy it. It's a mistake. It's a mistake. It's a mistake. It's a mistake. And I see it all the time, by the way. This is what happens when people have all this debt. They don't realize that debt goes on the balance sheet and not the profit and loss statement. And what ends up happening, I know I'm talking over some of your heads. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just let this part fly. But if it's sitting on the balance sheet and people not understanding that your taxes are paid on your P&L, your net income, not realizing that your balance sheet's where the debt goes. And so you guys have to pay taxes on your net income. But then after that, you still have to pay all your debt. And most people don't realize that. And this is what gets people in trouble. And so so all of a sudden their tax accountant says, you made $250,000 last year. And they go, what? There's not $250,000 left in the bank. There wasn't $250,000. Many of you listening to this know exactly what I'm talking about. Exactly what I'm talking about. Debt is like a scalpel, right? Just because by the way, just because people will give you debt doesn't mean it's a good idea. We saw this in 2008. We saw it in 2008. Just because a banker will say yes. See, this is the problem that a lot of people make too, is, well, they gave me the loan. Certainly they wouldn't give me the loan if it was a bad loan. Well, that's not true at all. They've actually figured out that, like, giant corporations, like, they know that so many of you will just go default on the loan, and they're just willing to put it into their numbers. You're a statistic to them. So just because they'll lend you the money does not mean it's a good financial decision. So when we think about debt, what do you think about like this? Debt is like a scalpel. Utilized well and strategically, utilizing somebody else's money at a low interest rate can make you phenomenally wealthy. As long as you don't overuse it, over leverage is not good, but you can utilize somebody else's money at a low interest rate and become very wealthy doing it. But what you have to do is keep in mind is when you take that debt out, you need to know strategically, what's my ROI from this debt? Why am I taking this out versus paying cash? What's my ROI and what is my plan to pay it down aggressively once I take it out? How do I get this debt paid down? How do I not keep it on my books? How do I utilize it to buy an appreciating asset or something that has a significant ROI? You might have a significant ROI on a depreciating asset, but you better know what that ROI is, and then we'll take that ROI and put it into a appreciating asset. Okay. Now I know this podcast is a little deeper than some, and I could put a whiteboard here and we could do, this is why people come to workshops with me and spend time with me, is because a lot of this is a little deeper in concept, and we probably need a whiteboard and get some math out and do some numbers, and your situation's different. But I want you to realize that a Dave Ramsey is not talking to the average person. I think I heard a number that his average listener is in $62,000 of credit card debt or something to that effect. Okay. And would it matter if it was $4,000 in credit card debt? The truth is he's speaking to somebody who's kind of in a different place than you. And he knows that, by the way. And I'm speaking to you saying, look, I want you to have no personal debt. By the way, I always tell people there's 2 things that wealthy people have in common. 2 things. And if you don't know this, write these down because they're really helpful to your success. They have low to no personal debt, and they own real estate. That's just a fact. And if you don't believe me, go look it up. That's what wealthy people have in common. So look, if you're buying a bunch of things that depreciate, you're making a gigantic, huge blunder in your financial wealth planning. It's a complete mistake. Get rid of that stuff. Quit keeping up with the Joneses. It's not what wealthy people do. I do agree with Dave Ramsey that for a while you live like nobody else so that eventually you can live like nobody else. And I do agree with that. I think if you make strategic financial decisions and you do them well, strategically, but I'm not against debt like he is, and I'm certainly not. I think it can be utilized very well. If most starting off dentists had to wait to save $500,000 to start their business, they would never go into business. Debt can be utilized very well. I think you need to take a certain portion of money that's coming out of your practice, and I think you need to buy assets. Now, buying those assets might mean that you put a down payment and then you take out a loan for the rest of it. And it might be you buying investment real estate. It might be commercial real estate. It might be other businesses. It might be other things. But think's the wrong word. I know that you need to look at every month. Not only do you need to accumulate cash, but you need to every month take a certain portion of that. And you need to realize that a certain portion of your money should be going to something that is actually being utilized to create wealth that is taking money out of your hands. If you learn how to utilize debt, and you learn how to utilize it well. Now, this is not a ticket. Don't say, Eric, I listened to the Dental Wealth podcast and he told me to go take out a bunch of debt. That is not what I said to do. I'm saying it like right into the camera again. It's not what I'm telling you to do. What I'm telling you is it is a scalpel. And if you understand financial management and you understand that you don't buy depreciating assets very rarely and only if they have significant ROI, and we utilize that ROI to make strategic moves, we do not take out a bunch of debt. One of the biggest mistakes, that the difference between dentists that are making a tremendous amount of wealth in their practices and the ones that aren't, are people that are over leveraged tend to not make money out of their practice. They can't understand why they don't. They have too much debt. Why do they have too much debt? Because they didn't know how to use it as a scalpel. They used it as a machete. They bought everything with debt. They never looked at the ROI. And by the way, some of you listening to me, it's you. You used a machete approach. Every time that they say they give you debt, you said sure. And then one day you woke up and you went, why am I not making the money I want to make? You're not making the money you want to make because someone told you to use debt as a machete. And just because they gave it to you, you took it and you don't understand what's going on. If you need more help on something like this, then reach out to Tower Leadership. We'll be more than happy to sit down with you and kind of create the scalpel approach with you. We'll talk you through this type of stuff and we're more than happy to help. But I want you to understand debt because this is a sophisticated conversation. Maybe some people would say, well, you shouldn't have this with people you don't know yet. I care about you guys. I mean, that's the honest truth. I really do care about you guys. I think you get a lot of bad information in the marketplace. And I'm not saying they're bad people giving you the information. Maybe they're limited in knowledge. Maybe they're limited in scope. There's other reasons why. I believe that you guys can take this information and do good things with it. MBA concept. Debt is more risk. Equity is more expensive. Debt is more risk. Equity is more expensive. That is an MBA concept. You hear it here on the Dental Wealth podcast. Write it down. Hey, wealth, the truth is that equity has opportunity cost. We can cover in another podcast, but it has an opportunity cost. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about debt. And I want you to think about debt in the way of saying, well, how have I poorly used debt in the past? What depreciating assets have I bought with debt? And was that a good decision and not a good decision, and why? Where could I utilize debt in a strategic scalpel approach to grow my net worth and to grow my wealth by using it correctly. And if you do those two things, and if you start actually looking at the mistakes you've made, by the way, don't beat yourself up. And that's not the point of this, is to beat yourself up. We've all made mistakes. So you don't beat yourself up for it. You just go, look, I know that was a boneheaded decision. I shouldn't have done that. And I did this. And and by the way, a lot of what we learn about wealth is from our parents anyhow. And then we just follow our colleagues. And by the way, I want you to hear me. I'm going to say a number. It's going to blow you guys, most of you away. And I want you to, 95% of dentists, 95%. I've said it on this podcast, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to back it up in a second. 95% of dentists will retire with less income than they had when they were working. Don't let that be you. And I'm going to tell you, as someone who's worked, literally had thousands of one-on-one meetings, it's true. Only about 5% of you that come see us, only about 5% of you are on that path, that know how to use this stuff correctly, that know how to utilize debt, they know how to grow their wealth. 95% of you struggle with this concept and these concepts. So if you feel like you're if you feel like I'm beating you up, or you feel like you're beating yourself up, don't do that. 95% are struggling with you. Now, they won't tell you that. They're going to tell you how successful they are and how well they've done and how smart they are and they bought this and they... Don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. They're telling you a story because they want to kind of justify in their head their own bad decisions. Maybe we all do that sometimes. But I want you to get a handle around debt. Go back and look at your debt. Hey, is this a depreciating asset, or did I use it to buy an appreciating asset? If it's depreciating, I'd get rid of it. Where could I utilize debt in the future? So spend some time on this subject. I want you to really, really spend some time on this. And if we can help you at Tower Leadership, reach out at Tower Leadership. We'll be more than happy to help you. You can certainly reach out to us on the web. So you can just go to towerleadership.com, put in a request form. Somebody will reach out to you and have this conversation with you. So I know this is a complex topic. I hope I didn't get too deep. I really tried not to get, each one of these little stories and conversations, I could literally talk for 3 hours. Sometimes I do on stage. And so I could talk for hours and hours and hours on each one of these points. And so that's where this conversation's a little hard on a podcast, because they're what we call stage conversations, right? Each one of your situations are different, right? And so when you're on a microphone like this, you're really trying to have a stage conversation. You're trying to give people their overall philosophy, and then each individual you got to take and break their own situation apart. So listen, make sure you're doing this. Make sure this is one of the biggest mistakes people make. We get all these conversations around, it's constantly, we're inundated with how to save, how to invest, how to buy mutual funds and TD Ameritrade and all these other companies, right? But no one's talking about how to utilize debt well. Where's the education on that? Dave Ramsey just tells you have no debt, which doesn't help business people. So where's the education around debt? Where's the education around how to use it well and how to utilize it and how to make smart business strategic decisions? And I'll tell you, there's very little to none. And I think people get heavy on one side and very light on the other. And I think if you actually put both of them, like swords in your sheaths, right? If you have both of them and you know how to utilize them well, it'll make you really, really, really wealthy. Guys, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.